Welcome to Good Money Moves, the show where we share financial tips and advice to help you feel financially empowered. I'm Jenna Taubel, and with me today is Jordan Kaehler, our loan portfolio manager at First Alliance Credit Union, and we are here to talk all about paying off debt, strategies that you can use to get you where you want to be with your debt payoff goals. So, Jordan, thank you so much for being here today. I'm excited to have you back with us.
Yeah, I'm excited to be here too.
Awesome. Why don't you kick it off by just sharing a little bit about yourself and your role here at the credit union?
Yeah. So, like you said, I'm Jordan Kaehler. I started working here at First Alliance in 2019 and just recently moved into being the loan portfolio manager here in March of 2024. I oversee our underwriting team for consumer loans. When I say consumer, that would be your vehicle loan, credit card, a consolidation, anything like that. I also help with our business underwriting to work through some business loans to see what kind of structures might make sense, and then also keep an eye on our overall portfolio to make sure that, are we taking too much risk in one area, are we taking too little risk in a different area, and just make recommendations for interest rates and kind of a risk appetite on our lending portfolio. So
it sounds like you deal with debt all day long.
Oh, yeah.
For all of our members.
You betcha.
Awesome. So you're the right person to have in the seat today for
all
sure.
Right. Yeah.
Let's start off with talking about if you are in a position where you're feeling like you're really living paycheck to paycheck, but you want to get your debt reduced. What advice do you have for somebody about where to begin to really start to maybe be a little bit more aggressive with paying down debt?
Yeah. So at the end of the day, it's a numbers game. Either you need to have more income or reduce your expenses if you're living paycheck to paycheck. And sometimes it can feel very overwhelming. I think back to when I was at my prior employer. It's really when I first introduced myself to a budget. And I think people see that word as scary, intimidating, because it is, especially if you're not familiar with it. And so going through 3 months worth of expenses, which sounds like a lot. Side note, we do have a My Money tool that you can use to import, transactions and keep an eye on. But take your average expenses just to realize like where you're at with your spending. Once you realize where you're at with your spending, because getting more income is a little more tricky than sitting down with a budget. But it is very eye-opening. I know for me, I'd go to Casey's, I'd get a slice of breakfast pizza every morning, I'd go and I'd get my lunch there, and then when you do that, say your average transaction, it's say $7 a time, so 14 a day over 30 days, that adds up, So realizing where you can actually make some reductions to expenses will help to realize some savings that with that savings you can turn around and apply above your minimum payments on credit cards or above your minimum payment on a car loan or whatever loan you might have. Really, I think a big thing, Dave Ramsey talks about having your $1,000 emergency fund. And so I think getting that in place first and then starting to aggressively pay down with whatever extra gap you have is where it's going to be really important. And that's where you'll start to see some momentum. Yeah,
that's great advice. And I like that you break it down into you can either increase your income or reduce your expenses. Like there's more than one option to work towards, and whatever one makes sense for your budget and your goals, like you can kind of pick and choose the best strategy to move forward from there. So I think for a lot of young people, it's really easy to fall into debt traps like high interest credit cards and not knowing how to use them appropriately, payday loans. What are some things that you would say to a young person to avoid like falling into these types of things, and what education should someone know about these types of loans essentially?
So you use the word education, that's exactly kind of what I was going to say. I think that having an understanding of how it works and what's out there is half of the battle. I think that people fall victim to high interest predatory loans or loans that maybe just have some absurd interest rates because it's what's marketing to them and it's easy and there's a lot of fine print and loan documentation that's easy to glance over. reaching out to anybody here at First Alliance is going to be huge with equipping people with the knowledge they need in order to make an informed decision. I think that if you don't have the information, it's too easy to fall victim to that stuff.
Yeah.
I've seen, there was someone that we just worked with who had a loan, and they didn't really understand the terms, assumingly, that they had signed up for, but they were paying 699% interest on a $1,000 loan.
Oh my goodness.
And that's excessive, and it kind of breaks my heart when I see that kind of stuff, because it's like people are in a tight spot, or they don't understand, and so we want to make sure that there's just information available so that people make informed decisions.
Yeah, awesome. I think the last time we had you on the show, we talked a lot about credit scores, and what is a person's impact on their credit score as far as the ability to pay down debt? What are obviously debt, credit score go hand in hand. So if you are overburdened with debt, how is that impacting your credit score? Really, how does that show up?
Yeah. So generally speaking, the lower your credit score, the higher the interest rate you're going to pay. And where people really realize this, kind of is with credit cards. They have their minimum payment, and every credit card's payment structure is going to be a little bit different. But most credit cards are going to have interest rates of, I think right now, probably high 20s, low 30s. We have better rates than that on our credit cards.
We do.
But when you see and you're trying to pay down debt and you're stuck at a 30% interest rate and your minimum payment, say, is $40, it's going to be tough to feel like you're getting any momentum in pay down when you have those higher rates. For something to kind of get some momentum would be to transfer that to an installment debt loan or a personal loan or something like that, because you're going to be having lower rates. And if you can maintain your payments where they are, or you're paying above your minimums, if you keep those payments where they're at or pay a little bit more with a reduced interest rate, you'll get out of debt sooner than paying your minimums on a credit card at 30%.
Sure. Well, that kind of leads me into the next question that I had for you. Is it better to focus on paying off smaller debts first, so that you have maybe some quick wins, or is tackling the larger ones with maybe the higher interest rates more important, or is one approach better than the other for paying off debt?
I think that there are a few different pros and cons to each of those methods. For me, I'm really big on taking Dave Ramsey's approach. I know a lot of people will say, pay off your high interest debt first, or pay your biggest one off first, because that's going to free up your cash. But, and again, with every method, there's different pros and cons. I think the Dave Ramsey method is the best in a snowball approach.
Sure.
And so say you've got 3 credit cards, one with a $100 balance, one with a $300 balance, and one with a $500 balance. You are going to do whatever you can, kind of when we're talking about that first question you asked about your budget. You realize where you can save some money, and that savings you'll turn around and apply towards your $100 credit card. Say it has a payment of $20 or something. And so you found where you can save $50 in a month.
Sure.
So you take that 50, apply it to your minimum payment on your lowest balance debt, or in this case, the $100 credit card. You'll have that paid off in 2 months or so, or a month and a half, however long,
Yeah.
And so then you'll take that $70 once that's paid off, and you'll apply that to your next credit card. So now instead of paying $70, you're paying $90. And the big thing with this, just from a psychological perspective, is going to be actually writing out the debts that you have from highest balance to lowest, and once it's paid off, cross it off. There's something to be said in crossing something off of a list, be like, yes, that's done. You know what I mean?
It's motivating.
It's motivating.
Yeah.
And if you hit your highest balance debt, you're going to be paying that for a long time. And it's going to be tough to get that motivation. It'll probably be easier to fall back and, and harder to get that momentum. So.
No, that makes a ton of sense. And I like the name for that approach, the snowball method, because it is such a great visual to think about that as it's rolling forward and kind of you're paying off those debts. You're getting a bigger payment that you can put towards the next debt and the next debt, and you're just like making this really big impact at the end of it all. Yeah. So, what one of the methodologies that I've heard of outside of the snowball method, although I suppose you could marry the two in some way, is making biweekly payments instead of monthly payments. Is that truly helpful to do it that way? Like, some people are like, well, it'll be better for your credit score if you do that, or, you know, it'll just bump you because you'll have a couple extra payments at the end of the year. Like, is that a realistic way to pay down debt? Is that as beneficial as people say?
Yeah, there are benefits to it. If you think of most loans have a monthly payment. And so if you think of, you know, how many payments you're making throughout a year, you've got 12 monthly payments. Most people get paid on a biweekly pay schedule or every other week. And throughout the span of a year, there are 26 pay periods. So if you kind of try and equate that out to monthly, you're making 13 payments throughout the year instead of the 12, sure, if that makes sense. And so what you're doing is you're paying down your principal balance faster throughout the year, sure, because you're making payments more frequently, and you get one extra payment throughout the year made. So it's going to help a little bit with some additional pay down.
Sure.
I know a lot of people do that with their mortgage, and when you have those higher dollar loans, that's really where you're going to see it. I mean, if you do that, I don't know exactly what it is, but I know you can shave a few years off a repayment just by doing that on a mortgage.
Yeah, no, that makes a ton of sense, and I think you make a great point in that you're really just putting almost more towards the balance than you are towards paying additional interest or anything like that with that method. And I think I use a method similar to that for my mortgage payment as well. So that's a great point that, you know, it doesn't have to just be for credit card debts. It could be for any type of loan or debt that you have to make some progress there. One of the things that I know a lot of people struggle with is balancing trying to save money and also pay down debt at the same time. Are there any like tips or tricks that you could share to figure out how to prioritize one or the other, or how to do both at the same time effectively?
Yeah. What I think, it all depends on the person. So it's tough to say that to blanket, this is the best way to handle it, because personal finance is personal. I know it's cliche, but
it is. Though, it's why it's called personal, right? Yeah.
And so, for me, I think it's important to make sure that you do have something in savings while you're working to pay down debt. I know Dave Ramsey suggests 1,000. Whatever number is comfortable for you. Essentially, you want to make sure that you've got enough cash on hand to cover most emergencies without having to rely back on debt.
Sure.
If your goal is to get out of debt, you want to make sure that you've got savings to cover that emergency, so you don't have to put it on a credit card, because then now you're working backwards and not accomplishing the goal that you want. So it all depends on each household. How much do they perceive to be necessary for most emergencies, and what that is may vary from one house to the next. So I think it is a healthy balance, and it is a tricky balance. I know for me, $1,000 in savings is really ideal until you get your debt paid down to where it's just your mortgage, and then work to save, they say, I think 3 to 6 months worth of expenses, which can seem like a huge barrier. But if you have no other debt, and whatever you were paying in debt payments, once it's all paid off, if you turn around and lump that in your savings account and don't spend it, it's tempting to spend when you've got extra cash, but that's really the best way to go about it if the goal is to get out of debt in the long run.
Yeah, so it sounds like you're kind of recommending have at least a small emergency fund in place, and then once you have that established for yourself as kind of a fallback, then worry more about aggressively paying down your debt, because you'll ultimately be in a more secure financial position while you're paying down your debt for that reason.
Yep. And if an emergency does come up where you have to deplete your emergency savings, it stinks, but that's why it's there.
Exactly.
And so as soon as an emergency comes up, because an emergency will come up at some point throughout our lives, numerous times, instead of shift your mindset from paying down debt to replenishing your emergency savings and then go back to paying down debt.
Yeah. I want to kind of transition into talking a little bit about some specific strategies and tools that people have available to consider when it comes to paying down debt, and debt consolidation is one that comes to the top of my mind. Can you talk a little bit about what someone should consider when they're considering debt consolidation as a strategy to pay off their debt?
Yeah, I think being very mindful of the rates. You can go, some creditors will have higher rates, some will have lower. Shop around. I think it's, people shop around with a car. I don't know if people really do that with an unsecured loan.
Sure.
In most cases, your installment debt or a personal loan, car loan, things like that, are going to have lower rates than your revolving debt, which would be your credit card, line of credit, things like that. And so I think being very mindful of the rate is going to be big. But then also doing a lot of self-reflection on what caused me to get into this position in the first place.
Sure.
And am I willing to make some necessary changes so that I don't fall into a worse position down the road?
Yeah.
And those are tough questions to ask, and you're not going to know unless you actually sit down and kind of have a meeting with yourself about how is my spending, am I making enough, or are there areas that I need to cut down back so I don't end up in this position again? Because sometimes people will take out consolidations and maybe they'll leave their card open and then they swipe it here and they swipe it there, and then now you actually have more monthly payments than what you did when you first took out the consolidation in dollars, and how many people you're having to send a check or whatever out to every month. So I think being aware of the interest rates and truly being motivated to get out of debt is huge, and that's a tough one, because if you don't have a budget and you don't know exactly where you're spending, it's going to be real tough to be like, I can do this consolidation and that'll be the end of my debt. You need to make sure that you have a plan so that you don't get into the same position again. Yeah,
that's really, really great advice. And I'm thinking, the other strategy that comes to mind, it's similar to debt consolidation in a way, but that's like credit card balance transfers as a form of debt consolidation. But to your point, if you've got credit card debt and then you're continuing to have credit card debt, that can kind of open the door for continued overspending and for some cases. So what are some tips if somebody does want to do a balance transfer to kind of consolidate some of their credit card debt? What are some things they should be thinking of when it comes to managing the payoff of that? Yeah.
So I think the main thing is being informed on what the terms of, say, there's a lot of places that offer an interest-free balance transfer. We do for 6 months.
Yes.
So when you do a balance transfer, you want to make sure that however much you transfer over, take however much that is and divide it by how many months your promotional period is for. And does that number seem too high for a payment? Because we don't do this, but there are a lot of other places where if you don't get that balance paid off by the end of the promotional period, any interest that otherwise would have occurred gets tacked right on as soon as that promotional period's done. And then you're right back to where you were at a 30% interest rate, and any momentum that you had with pay down is going to be just sucked right up with the interest that came in.
Yeah.
So it's really understanding the fine print of what does a balance transfer mean with this specific creditor. And then again, just making sure that however much you do transfer, try to have a plan to get that paid off before the promotional period's done. One thing that you could also do is take advantage of that interest-free period, and then once that period's up, apply for some kind of installment loan or a personal loan so that you can pay that off in full to a lower interest rate before the promotional period's up.
That's great advice. I love that it's about really thinking ahead in the grand scheme of getting all this paid off. It's not just looking for those quick wins. It's, long term, how can you set yourself up for success? So the last question I have for you before we wrap up is there's, I think, a lot of maybe, I don't know if misconception is the right word, but debt management plans versus debt settlements. What do those words even mean? And is there a time when one might be more beneficial to somebody versus doing something like a debt consolidation? Talk a little bit about the difference between those things.
Yeah, so debt management programs and debt settlement programs, those are kind of, I'd say that they're kind of your last case, the last thing that you'd want to do. But if you have to choose between a debt management program or a debt settlement program, I would suggest a debt management program, and I'll explain what the differences are between the two. A debt management program is essentially you're going to make one payment to a company, and that company is going to disperse payments to whoever you are including in that plan. So if you've got 5 credit cards or something that you need some help with managing, the debt management program, you'll send the money to them, they'll send the money to the credit card companies. There are some advantages to doing that. The debt management company can offer what's called concessions, where maybe they can negotiate with your creditors. Say if you're stuck at a 30% interest rate on your credit card, maybe they can negotiate down, I've heard, down to 7%. Granted, the trade-off is that card's getting closed.
Sure.
But going from 30% down to 7% is a huge win.
Savings.
And if you can do that with a few creditors, you'll get things paid off. The positive with that is that you're going to maintain positive payment history and your score will reflect that.
Sure.
The reason I say debt management program is probably more advantageous in the long run compared to a debt settlement program is that a debt settlement program is going to tell you to not pay anybody. You'll become very past due. Eventually the loan essentially it's called a charge-off. Eventually it will get charged off, which means like the creditor does not believe they're going to get paid. They were past due. They need to get it off their books, and essentially it's a loss. And so after that happens, attorney, like you'll pay monthly fees to an attorney, and then the attorney will negotiate on your behalf with a creditor to be like, I know that they owe you $1,000, but would you take $300?
Sure.
And then maybe they'll take $300, but the cost of doing that is not only what you're paying to the attorney. You're going to be faced with a credit score that is less than ideal. So if you do need a loan, it's going to be tougher to get loans. And if you do get a loan, you're going to be paying some egregious interest rates in order to get that. So it really hurts you a lot more in the long run. We partner with GreenPath for a debt management program. Sometimes when we take a loan application and for whatever reason we're not able to assist, we try to refer people over to GreenPath for those specific reasons. In that they can negotiate better interest rates compared to the cards and everything that I've already mentioned. So between debt management program and debt settlement, if you had to choose, debt management, in my opinion, is the way to go because you'll still maintain a good score. If you do need a loan, you'll likely get more favorable interest rates because your score will not be very as low as what it otherwise would be. But always start with us and come to us and see if there's something that we can do before having to get to a position of that.
Yeah. Well, awesome. This has been an awesome conversation. You are so knowledgeable, Jordan. I'm so happy to have you back here today. Thank you for tuning in. Please, before you go, make sure to subscribe to this show so you never miss an episode. And if you want to learn more about how to pay off debt or learn more about First Alliance Credit Union, visit our website at firstalliancecu.com. And this has been Good Money Moves. Thank you for tuning in.